Sometimes silence carries more weight than words, and one unexpected question can shatter everything you thought you understood about love, family, and the fragile threads that hold us together. What began as a quiet drive on a gray Sunday afternoon turned into a moment I'll never forget. A moment that changed the way I saw my own son and myself forever. Hi everyone, before I begin, where are you watching us from tonight? I love knowing which cities or small towns you're tuning in from. It always makes me feel like we're sitting together, sharing a story over a cup of coffee. It was supposed to be a simple ride, nothing more, nothing less. Gregory had called earlier that morning, asking if I could pick him up from the train station. His car had broken down again, and the mechanic said it would take at least 2 days. I didn't hesitate, of course. No mother would. Besides, the drive wasn't long, about 40 minutes through the winding roads outside town. The kind of drive where the sky hangs low, gray clouds brushing the tops of the trees, and the air smells faintly of wet earth and pine. When I pulled up, he was already waiting, tall, leaning slightly against a metal post, one hand in his jacket pocket, looking both too grown and too young at the same time. It always caught me off guard, how much he reminded me of his father, even though he rarely spoke of him. The same eyes, quiet but full of thoughts. The same jawline that tensed when something was on his mind. "Hey, Mom," he said, sliding into the passenger seat. His voice was calm, but something in it felt restrained. We drove in silence for the first few miles, the hum of the tires the only sound between us. I could feel his gaze now and then, the kind of look that wanted to speak but didn't yet have the courage to form words. I didn't press him. Gregory was never one to open up easily, and I'd learned long ago that if I just gave him time, he'd come around. The road cut through the edge of the woods, where tall birches stood like silent witnesses. The air inside the car was warm, soft music playing faintly from the radio, an old tune from the 70s, something my husband used to hum. I reached to turn it up, but Gregory spoke first. "Mom," he said quietly, "can I ask you something personal?" That tone, so hesitant, almost fragile, made my heart tighten. "Of course," I said, glancing at him with a small smile. "You can ask me anything." He didn't answer right away. He just looked out the window, watching the trees blur into streaks of green and gray. Then he said, "Did you ever feel like you settled? Like maybe you lived your whole life trying to do the right thing and forgot what you actually wanted?" I didn't expect that, not from him. I kept my eyes on the road, but my breath hitched slightly. "That's a big question," I managed to say. "Why do you ask?" He shrugged, a nervous gesture. "I don't know. I guess I've just been thinking about how easy it is to get stuck. You do what people expect. You get married, you work, you raise a family. Then one day you look around and realize half your life's gone, and you're not even sure if you ever lived it the way you wanted to." The words lingered in the car, heavy and uncomfortably true. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I slowed down slightly, my hands tightening around the steering wheel. Because the truth was, yes, I had felt that, more times than I'd ever admit. When I finally spoke, my voice was softer. "Gregory, everyone feels that way at some point. You reach a certain age and start wondering if the choices you made were really your own, or just what you thought you were supposed to do." He nodded, still looking out the window. "So you felt that too?" I hesitated, then said, "Yes, especially after your father passed. There were years where I felt like I was just existing, doing what needed to be done. Not really living, not really feeling." He turned then, meeting my eyes. "That must have been lonely." I smiled faintly, though something in his gaze made my heart ache. "It was," I said, But loneliness teaches you things. It makes you listen to the quiet parts of yourself. We fell silent again. The radio had switched to another song, an instrumental piece, soft piano and rain sounds. The kind of song that fills the spaces where words don't fit. I could feel the tension in him shift, something unspoken growing heavier between us. Then out of nowhere he said it, the question that would stay with me long after that ride ended. Do you ever wish you'd done something different with your life? That maybe you hadn't married Dad? That maybe you'd chosen someone else? My hands froze on the wheel. The sound of the tires against the road suddenly seemed louder, almost intrusive. For a moment, I couldn't find my voice, because how do you answer that to your own child? Gregory, I began carefully, choosing each word as if it were glass. Your father and I had our share of struggles, but I loved him. Even when things were hard, I never wished for someone else. But, I paused, swallowing hard. I do sometimes wish I'd given more of myself a chance. The parts of me that didn't fit into being a wife or a mother. He was quiet, but I could see him thinking. The way his jaw moved slightly, the furrow forming on his brow. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, I think that's why I've been afraid to settle down. I don't want to end up wondering like that. The honesty in his voice hit me deeper than I expected. He wasn't just asking about me. He was asking about himself. About his fear of becoming someone he didn't recognize. I looked at him again, seeing not just my son, but a man, vulnerable, searching, and quietly brave for asking. You're already ahead of me then, I said gently. Because you're asking the questions I was too afraid to ask at your age. He gave a faint, crooked smile, one that reminded me of when he was little and used to apologize without words. Guess I get that from you. The rest of the drive was quiet again, but it wasn't the heavy kind of silence anymore. It felt reflective, like the air itself had shifted, making room for something deeper between us. When we pulled into the driveway, the light was fading, painting the house in soft orange and gold. Gregory unbuckled his seatbelt, then turned toward me before opening the door. Thanks for picking me up, he said, and for being honest. I nodded, my throat tight. Anytime, sweetheart. He smiled, then stepped out, the door closing with a soft click. I watched him walk toward the porch, hands in his pockets, head slightly bowed. And for the first time in years, I felt like I'd seen him, not just as my son, but as a man finding his own way. That night, long after he'd gone to bed, I sat by the window, the sound of the rain still in my ears. I thought about his question, about all the quiet roads I'd traveled in my life without ever realizing how much I'd been carrying. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe it wasn't too late to start listening to that quiet part of myself again. The rain carried on through the night, steady and silver, tapping the gutters like fingernails on a tabletop. I slept with the window cracked just a little, and the sound found its way in, soft, almost like breath. The house felt full again, the way it used to when Gregory was small, and would leave a trail of socks from the front door to his room. Only now, he moved with quiet care, putting his shoes by the mat, rinsing his glass after he drank, closing doors the way people do when they know a room doesn't just hold things, it holds echoes. I woke before dawn and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, both hands wrapped around the mug to chase off the early chill. The porch light was still on, throwing a cone of honey yellow down the steps, and beyond it our old maple tree trembled with shallow wind. When Gregory padded in, hair tousled, wearing a faded college sweatshirt and that cautious morning smile, I felt something loosen in me. I remembered the way he used to climb into my lap with a picture book, insisting on turning the pages himself. Time compresses the strangest way. Some days it feels like it stretches into long, unbroken rope. Other days it's all knotted, one moment pulling another straight up through the floor. Morning, he said, reaching for the second mug. Morning, I answered. How'd you sleep? He shrugged, poured, then leaned against the counter. Like a rock, then not at all, then a rock again. Brain won't shut up. That's a family trait, I said. We're chronic thinkers. It's a disease no one wants to cure. He smiled into his mug, steam fogging his glasses for a moment. I was thinking about yesterday, he admitted, about what I asked. It felt heavy. I hope I didn't. You didn't do anything wrong, I said quickly. Asking honest questions isn't wrong. It's brave. He studied me over the rim of his cup. Brave is not what I felt. Maybe not then, I said, but it is now. You didn't bury it under small talk. You brought it to me. We stood there for a while, each taking small sips, the clock above the pantry giving its steady tick. In the hallway, the heater kicked on with a low, comforting hum. He put his mug down and reached for the toolbox I keep under the sink. I was thinking I could fix that loose hinge on the back door, he said, if it still squeaks. It sings a little every time I take out the trash, I answered. I've gotten used to its solo. He laughed, then disappeared down the hall. That's another thing he gets from his father. This compulsion to fix what he can fix, even if it's just a hinge or a sticking latch. When grief first came, years ago, it felt like a tide that didn't know the shoreline. We fixed small things because the big things didn't have any screws. While he worked, I started breakfast. Eggs, toast, bacon, and a few cherry tomatoes sliced into crescents because they looked cheerful that way. The scent filled the kitchen, and I remembered Sunday mornings when the three of us would shuffle around each other like a small parade, his father flipping pancakes, me with a dish towel over my shoulder, Gregory sneaking extra syrup and swearing he didn't. Now it was just the two of us, and the quiet wasn't empty. It was attentive. When we sat down to eat, I watched him butter his toast with absent concentration, his mind still somewhere else. I waited. If parenthood had levels, the higher ones were all about patience. "Mom," he said at last, setting the knife down with that careful clink, "there's another thing." I raised my eyebrows in that go-on way I've perfected over decades of coaxing shy stories into the light. "I'm thinking of leaving my job," he said. "Not tomorrow, not recklessly, but it's been gnawing at me. It's good on paper, stable, respectable. I can hear Dad's voice saying those words, and they still matter, but it doesn't feel like mine. I don't know how else to say it." I breathed out slowly. "And what does feel like yours?" He looked almost embarrassed, then met my eyes. "Designing things. Not websites, not exactly. Systems. Layouts for places. Making things work better for the people who use them. I've been volunteering with a community group, helping redesign a small public space near the river. Every time I'm there, I feel awake." There it was, the other kind of bravery, naming the part of yourself that is still learning to walk. "You know," I said, "when I was your age, I wanted to open a bookstore cafe. A little place that smelled like paper and cinnamon. I even sketched the layout, where the reading nook would go, what lamp would sit on what table. I never did it. I had good reasons. Reasons I don't regret. But the sketch is still in a drawer." He tilted his head. "Really?" "It's probably yellow with time by now," I said, smiling. "But yes, I still have it." He sat back, and the morning light framed him in pale gold. I could see him trying to fit me into that picture. His mother as a woman with her own blueprint, not just a supporting character in other people's plans. "When Dad got sick," he began softly, "I thought a lot about the word enough. Did we do enough? Did I help enough? If I left work early to bring him soup, did that matter enough? I think I've been living in that word. Enough for the mortgage, enough for the title, enough for what people nod at when they ask what you do." "And now?" I asked. And now I'm wondering if enough is different from true, he said, voice barely above a whisper. We cleared the plates without saying much more. He fixed the hinge. I wiped the counter. The rain slowed to a faint drizzle. The day stretched ahead like an unused road. After a while, he came back with his jacket and car keys. The mechanic called, he said. Part won't be in until tomorrow afternoon. Maybe we could run a few errands? Groceries? You always avoid the heavy bags. I'd only avoid bulking up my biceps, I said, patting his arm. But yes, let's. We drove in my car, wipers ticking rhythmically, the town wearing its wet Sunday face. The hardware store looked sleepy. The little bakery displayed rows of careful pastries like toy soldiers, and the grocery store lights shone too bright over quiet aisles. I watched him reach for things I used to have to remind him about: paper towels, batteries, the good soap. Somewhere between the cleaning supplies and the cereal aisle, he touched my elbow, a small grounding gesture, and whispered, Mom, remember when Dad used to make us pick a new fruit every week? No matter how weird it looked? I laughed out loud at the memory of starfruit slices and sticky mango afternoons. We argued over a dragon fruit for 20 minutes, I said. Finally bought it, then none of us liked it. We pretended to like it, he said. Dad ate an extra piece, so I wouldn't feel bad. He always did that, I murmured. He carried a lot of our pretend. We loaded the cart, debated brands no one should need to debate, and somewhere between mundane choices a gentler conversation grew. He told me about the community group near the river. The old benches no one used because they were facing the wrong way, the park entrance no one noticed because the sign was half hidden by a crooked fence. He lit up describing how they rotated the planters and added a little arch that framed the water. Sometimes meaning arrives through the smallest doorway, a bench turned 10 degrees, a sentence you didn't rush. On the way home, the clouds broke into strips, and the sky showed its pale back. Gregory rolled down the window just enough to let the air in and said, I've been angry at you sometimes, for not talking about Dad more, for being okay. I kept my eyes on the road, but I reached over and tapped the back of his hand. I wasn't okay, I said simply. I just learned to keep going without announcing that it hurt. Maybe I needed to hear it hurt, he said. I thought I was protecting you, I answered, unrealizing that sometimes protection looks like silence, and sometimes like a chair pulled out and a place set at the table for grief itself. He nodded, and we let the wind slip around our careful words. When we turned onto our street, he said, Do you still have Dad's toolbox in the garage? I do, I said. Second shelf. Why? I want to fix the porch light. It flickers. Your father will applaud, I told him, from wherever he fixes things now. The afternoon warmed just enough to open the windows. Gregory took the ladder out, climbed with that measured steadiness, and worked the bulb free. I stood at the base like a spotter. We didn't talk much, just passed tools and held the world steady while the other did a task. It felt like a sacrament, a ritual of small maintenance for a house that has kept more than its share of secrets. When he climbed down, he wiped his hands on a rag and leaned against the railing. I don't want to disappoint you, he said. If I leave the job, if I pivot, if I fail. Gregory, I said, and I surprised us both by how sure my voice sounded, my love for you is not stock price sensitive. It doesn't go up or down with the quarter. It existed before your first report card and will exist long after your last title. I want you to live a life you can stand inside. That's it. He stared at me, eyes bright and wet, in a way that had nothing to do with the damp air. He nodded once, the kind of nod a person gives when a knot finally starts to untie. As the day thinned toward evening, we decided to drive out to the river so he could show me the place he'd been working on. The roads were still slick, and the fields on either side looked like patchwork, dark, light, dark again, where the rain had flattened the grass. The river park sat just beyond the last of the old mills. The arch he'd mentioned stood at the entrance, modest black metal, with ivy starting to test its edges. Under it, the path curved in a way that made you slow down and take the first view in as if it were a painting. It used to go straight, he said, gesturing. People would glance and then keep walking. A curve asks you to turn your head. We walked the path, stopping at the benches that now faced the water. The river moved with unhurried muscle, brown-green and sure of itself. On another bench, an older couple sat sharing a paper bag of something, leaning shoulder to shoulder, their silence companionable. A little boy tossed pebbles with the seriousness only children give to small tasks. The world, which had felt so narrow for so long, showed me it still had space. I didn't know you could make places kinder, I said. You can, he answered softly. You just have to think about the person who'll be here next. We stayed until the light went amber and the insects began their evening orchestra. On the way back to the car, he said, do you ever think about the bookstore cafe? All the time, I said. I even have the name. He stopped. You do. Simbolo, I said. Not the Spanish word exactly, spelt like it, but with our own meaning. A place where every object is a sign that you belong. He rolled the name on his tongue. You should do it. I'm 58, I teased. And, he countered. The benches didn't care how old I was. We both laughed, and the sound unfurled something in my chest I hadn't realized was still knotted. I looked at him and saw not just my son, but a man offering me permission I hadn't thought I needed. We drove home quieter, the good kind of quiet. At dinner, we made a salad and reheated leftover soup. He told me a story about a teacher who changed his life by letting him redo a project from scratch. I told him about the time his father and I danced in the kitchen to a radio station that kept going out of tune, and how we laughed through the static. These stories became our bridge. Planks laid one by one until the gap felt less like a chasm and more like a stream you could step over. Later, when the dishes were drying and the house had returned to its evening hum, Gregory knocked on the doorframe of the room I use as an office now. In his hand, he held a folded sheet of thin paper, the edges worn soft. I found something, he said, stepping inside. He opened the paper carefully and laid it on my desk. My bookstore sketch, the reading nook, the lamp, the ridiculous doodle of a cat that was supposed to be a logo. Time had made the pencil lines gentle but not invisible. For a moment I couldn't speak. Then I traced the corner of the page with my fingertip, feeling the old urgency a life paused. Where did you find it? I whispered. In the box with Dad's receipts, he said. I was looking for a wrench and found a decade. I laughed and cried at the same time, an undignified and necessary sound. He stood close without crowding me, the way you stand near someone trying to remember who they were and who they still could be. Mom, he said, what if we made a plan? Not a promise, not a contract, just a first step. What does a first step look like? I asked, easing into the question like a new pair of shoes. For me, he said, it looks like talking to my boss. Not quitting tomorrow, but naming what's next. Taking a course. Shadowing someone. For you, maybe it's calling that empty storefront near the pharmacy we drive past every week. Asking what it costs to dream there. I looked at him, then at the old sketch, then at my hands. They are older hands than the ones that drew that picture. They are also hands that have held loss and kept cooking, that have turned pages and passed tools up a ladder and smoothed blankets over restlessness. Maybe they were exactly the hands to start this. Okay, I said. A first step. He grinned in that quiet way of his. Tomorrow. Tomorrow, I echoed. The word didn't feel like a cliff. It felt like a door. That night, after he turned in, I sat again by the window. The rain had finally stopped. The porch light he'd fixed burned steady. No flicker, just an ordinary, faithful glow. I thought about the question he asked me in the car, that sharp instrument that cut through the padded silence we'd both been living in. I realized how grateful I was for it. It hadn't broken anything fragile. It had broken something hard, something that needed to crack. In the backyard, the maple leaves shivered, relieved. I pictured the river benches slightly angled, inviting, and that arch that asked your neck to curve and your eyes to pay attention. The park had not changed the world. It had changed the posture of a small piece of it. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was true. I took the sketch to the kitchen and set it in the center of the table. Then I wrote a list, the kind I used to write for school lunches and holiday meals. 3 names to call about commercial space. 2 classes I could take at the community center on small business accounting. 1 friend to ask about suppliers for good coffee, and whether the cinnamon smell comes from the sticks or from something they do to the beans. I felt ridiculous and wonderful, like someone planning a party after a long winter. From down the hall, I heard Gregory's bedroom door open and his steps pause. He came to the kitchen doorway, hair rumpled, eyes soft with sleep. "You're up," he said. "I'm writing a list," I replied. "I'm very dangerous with a pen after 10 o'clock. He padded in and read the list over my shoulder. "You're serious," he murmured. "I'm serious about first steps," I said. "We don't have to promise ourselves the ending, just the beginning." He put a hand on my shoulder, a warm, steady weight. "I'm proud of you," he said. It struck me then how rarely we say those words to the people we assume already know them. I was proud of him, too, not because he had a plan, but because he had the courage to admit he needed one. We looked at each other like 2 hikers on opposite sides of the same trail who finally wave and say, "Well, look at us, still going." "I'll call the storefront in the morning," I said. "I'll email my boss," he replied. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. The air between us had the shape of a hug and the steadiness of a promise we didn't have to speak out loud. When the house was quiet again, I turned off the kitchen light and left the porch one on. I stood in the doorway for a moment and watched the steady bulb lift the darkness a few feet at a time. It didn't erase the night. It softened it, made it livable, made it ours. It was supposed to be a simple ride. It still makes me smile to think that's how it began. A broken car, a train station, a rainy road. But his question didn't tear anything sacred. It held up a mirror to the life I'd been skimming across and asked me to look longer. It gave me back the complicated, ordinary, beautiful truth that we are allowed to want, even after 58, that we are allowed to pivot toward something kinder, that mothers and sons can meet each other again as new people without losing who they've been. Before I went to bed, I returned to the window one last time. The porch light shone like a small, stubborn star. I thought about how many nights I'd sat there, listening for answers in the rain. Tonight I wasn't listening for an answer. I was listening for my own footsteps. I could hear them, the soft, steady rhythm of someone finally walking toward her life. And I thought of Gregory in the other room, drafting an email in his head, choosing his words with that care he learned from both of us. The future didn't feel like a verdict anymore. It felt like a path we could design, a bench turned at a better angle, a curve in the walkway that invited you to slow down and look at the water. Tomorrow would come with its usual mess. Phone calls unanswered, prices higher than expected, doubts trying to be louder than the list. But we had named the thing. We had lifted it into the air where it could be seen. We had made a first step. When I finally lay down, the house settled around me with all its familiar creaks. The silence didn't feel heavy. It felt full, like the pause after an overture, just before the curtain rises.